Morning, dear friends. Today is the 26th of Nisan, April 27th, Wednesday. And we're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, we are in the tail end, final page or so of the 15th chapter of Masechah Shabbos. We are Kuf Yud Dalid, Amud Aleph, that's 114a. And by all estimations, by the end of today's discussion, we'll be on 114b. And hopefully by tomorrow, we should be making a siyum on chapter 15 and moving on to chapter 16. So Baruch Hashem, we're making progress. We're covering ground. And we have managed in this chapter, although it started off on the subject of knots and recently treatment of garments. Long ago, you may recall, we had a discussion about talesim, folding garments on Shabbos. And then last Mishnah, which we are still in the midst of discussing, talks about, or the same Mishnah that started out talking about folding is talking about preparation, doing certain things in preparation for on Shabbos of after Shabbos. We talked about spreading, making a bed. If the purpose is for the Shabbos, it's okay. Making a bed for the purpose of after Shabbos, we said one should not do so. And we touched also upon the burning of chalavim, fats, from Shabbos to after Shabbos, from Shabbos to Yom Kippur. And so that's really where we're going to be resuming our discussion in a moment. So let me share the screen. And what I'd like to do, although it'll probably get us a little dizzy, I want to just open up a tab where we can view the Mishnah. Well, actually, you know what? We have a minute. So what we'll do is we'll finish up this Gemara as a few more lines, and then we'll open up another link. We'll re-explore the Mishnah together, and then we will embark on a discussion. The discussion is going to be touching a lot upon Yom Kippur, which is interesting because this week's Parsha, Achrei, is dominated with the discussion of Yom Kippur. So somehow we find connections between our Chabura here and the Parsha of the week. And so sit back, relax, or don't sit back, please. We hope to have your participation, engagement, and your assistance in studying this Gemara and ciphering it. So here we go. But first, we're talking about clothing etiquette and how clothing brings kavod. And in the temple, one should change one changes their clothing before doing dirty work. And on Shabbos, the kavod of Shabbos is putting on clothing, new clothing, a fresh set of clothing. And then we spoke a good little bit about a Talmid Chacham and how Talmid Chacham is expected to not have stains on his clothing. He's expected to present and represent the Torah, Hashem, in a dignified manner, befit of someone who's claiming to represent the Torah. So the idea, I guess, is if you are going to claim to represent the Torah, well, then you better do a good job and you better bring kavod and honor to the Torah. We pivoted to talk about, well, maybe a one patch is okay, two patches not okay, tattered clothing no good, but responsible, maybe that's acceptable. And then we quoted, as you may recall, Yeshaya walking around naked and barefoot and describing maybe it was a literary tool to portray how poor his clothing was. We then went on to talk about, okay, what are the rights? Or did we finish that? Yeah. What are the rights? What kind of Talmid Chacham is entitled to certain perks? And so we talked about a Talmid Chacham who's very mindful of their appearance. And then we talked about, and this was where we closed off, a Talmid Chacham who is appointed as a community leader and most likely what we might call in the time of the Mishnah and Gemara, a Rosh Yeshiva, someone who really had the highest tier of spiritual and social authority and responsibility. Well, this is someone who really is proficient in the Torah and all Masechtot, and that's where we left off yesterday. Dr. Hammer, you were saying something?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of off, but when you mentioned the talis thing and etiquette, the question is, and other things, which I'll give an example afterwards, does it matter if you own the talis or if it's somebody else's talis or the shul's talis? and the same thing with etiquette. If, for example, there's an understanding about how you put away a siddur and a machzor or a chumash, which goes on top of which and everything, is there any appropriate way of touching somebody else's svarim and doing it?
Interesting.
You know,
So
I've had that happen in our shul, and
yeah.
I don't have an issue with it, but I think it's just an interesting thing, whether depending on how it's done and by whom. But is it the same thing when you're doing with your property and somebody else's property?
So first of all, again, I don't want to wait. Well, there's a few very important comments. I think my initial thought was that you were saying that every person must put the siddur back on the shelf, and I was going to say that I'm 100% in support of that. No, but generally speaking, there are two questions. Is it ever acceptable to touch someone else's stuff? And if you do, what responsibility do you have towards that individual to restore their items to the way you got them? And there's a discussion, and it's not fresh on my mind, so I may get it wrong, but there are certain articles that we say a person is happy that someone else should do a mitzvah with their stuff. If I recall correctly, there's a discussion in the Shulchan Aruch, or maybe even the Gemara, but it's been a while, that you shouldn't touch another person's sefer because you can come to damage it. And I think the halachas say that was in a time where all manuscripts were handwritten and extremely precious and delicate and fragile. And maybe today a person is more willing to allow someone to use their siddur or a talis or a tefillin, but certainly they should be restored to exactly the location and the quality and the condition of where they were found. And I think one should also be mindful about the individual's stated and communicated view. So if a person says, I really don't want anyone to touch my talis or tefillin, well then regardless of an open-ended general sentiment that most people are okay with it, I think we should respect their position. It gets more complicated in both directions when a shul has a lot of talisim. Because why would you ever bother remove an individual's talis if the shul provides talisim? And second of all, that might also be an explanation. Sometimes people may not realize that they're touching a private person's talis. And so it gets complicated. But, and then, Doctor, I think just to add, again, these are not this is not the totality of the conversation. Obviously, just throwing some thoughts out there. Right. Probably what you do to a talis would depend on if there is a community standard. So in a shul where there's a set protocol, a shul dictated protocol about how to treat a talis, well then you should follow that protocol. In our shul, I will say that, like many aspects of our shul, because we are a melting pot of minhagim, I feel that the most appropriate thing is to encourage people to adhere to their personal family tradition, and I don't and I don't think it's necessarily correct, or I necessarily think it would be incorrect for the shul to try to dictate what people do with their talisim and the like. But generally speaking, in a shul like ours that have many talisim, by the way, one of our guests told me he wants to send a bunch of new talisim. I don't know if he will or not, but that would be a welcome thing, because over Yontif, we ran short of talisim actually, which I think is actually another milestone for our shul, that we ran out of talisim. Baruch Hashem. Anyway, that was more of a tease than a comprehensive response, but those are some thoughts. Alan?
I will never use a tallis a shul tallis, for the following reasons. Number one, people kiss the edges of the tallis before they put it on. Number two, they kiss the tzitzis. And number three, I've seen many people cough into their tallis. So
those are all good tools to encourage people using their own tallis and not having other people use their tallis.
That's right.
I can say pretty confidently that assuming there is a scenario where it is acceptable to borrow a tallis, it would be entirely unacceptable to cough into that tallis. But you're right. I think that's something to consider about keeping a tallis in a bag and away from. I'm not so worried about kissing. I thought you were going to say lice or something like that.
That's another one.
Rabbi, all of those should have been added to Shnai Mosin Batalas.
What? Yeah.
Good one, Bernie. Good one.
And don't forget lice are parasites.
Yeah.
They need blood. There's no blood in the talus.
Ah, okay. So you're saying the poor lice, achenvei for a louse that jumps onto a talus, stick on the head. All right.
Well, that just I have to put in a little knip. That's why it's much healthier if you're wearing a mask. So when you kiss the tits, if you keep your mask on, it's much So then maybe my friend Alan might consider using talus from somebody.
Ah,
Even when you sneeze with your mask on, there you go. It's not going out.
How about a mezuzah?
Only with
Mezuzah.
N95. We should hand out N95 masks.
How about a mezuzah?
I'm sorry.
Touching, kissing. How about a
Someone,
mezuzah?
I was speaking to one of our guests. I forgot who it was, and he questioned something. I was before Pesach. He had like a question about why did you do something. So I said, although in our shul, initially during COVID we had 8 feet apart and then 6 feet apart, and there were other, and people were standing back from the bima, and a lot of that has kind of gone back. But I told them I suspect that there are going to be vast halachas farm probing the source of different local minhagim. And one of the theories that a Talmud Chacham is going to have to consider is if those were mannerisms that were introduced in 2019 with the introduction of COVID. And I suspect there'll be all different nuanced quirks and hanhaga that will remain for generations to come that developed over COVID. For example, how people arrange themselves around the bima, there may be some like nuanced differences than before, and other such instances. So something to keep an eye out for if someone wants to do the scholarship. Well, not yet, but I think there's going to be a lot of interesting long-term dancing after Lechadoidi. There were shows that danced after Lechadoidi that don't dance after Lechadoidi, or dance different. They're just different things that we can't really predict. But I have a feeling that there's going to be a long-lasting influence of minhag that's been influenced by COVID. Maybe maybe this was all in response to the mezuzah. So I have a feeling there'll be people that would always kiss the mezuzah, touch the mezuzah, and then kiss their hand, and maybe that'll be somewhat moderated or modified. And so I'm not advocating or opposing anything, but I'm just saying that it's interesting to consider how our Jewish practices will be influenced by COVID-19.
Rabbi, up north, we allowed the people, if they had an aliyah, to make the bracha from their seat.
Right. We didn't do quite that, but we would have people stand back with the distance, so they're standing somewhat approaching the bima, but not. I mean, is that the present practice as well, or has that been modified?
Right now, they have sort of a plastic shield. It's working.
Right.
It depends. That's the ebb and flow of the disease itself.
Right. So I'm saying in 20 years' time, with Hashem's help, this will be entirely past us. But there will still be shuls that people don't fully approach the bima, and it's going to be a result of this. So it's interesting, and then you can use this instance and think: are there other minhagim or other mannerisms or customs that developed? The famous joke about the lady who's cutting her roast on both ends, and the mother is visiting, and she says, "Mom, why do we have the family?"
The pot was too small.
What? Yeah,
The
exactly.
pot was too small.
The grandmother's pot was too small, so they would trim the roast. So you never, I'm not saying this chas v'shalom to belittle the importance of minhag.
But you have another change sometimes in kissing the Torah, the mantle when the Torah is carried around.
Yeah. So just like the kissing of the mezuzah, there will be so. Anyways, all interesting. Then you're gonna have halacha works that say, when you go to shul, you should wash netilas yadayim, and then the minig hamakim is that you squirt 3 squirts of hand sanitizer, and it's going to enter into the halacha works before long.
The right hand first, of course.
Not only that, it's going to depend what kind of squirt.
And hold on, now we're going to ask the professor the shiurim of the squirt. Is it a 1 ounce or a 1/4 ounce? And Was it precise or is it a okay? All right, back into the Gemara. So Rabbi Yochanan taught, Eizu Talmud Chacham shememanin oisoi parnes al tzibur. Who is the kind of Talmud Chacham who is appointed as a parnes? This is a person who is proficient in matters of halacha in any given segment, afilu b'meseches kala, even an infrequently explored tractate we refer to as meseches kala.
Does the Talmud tell us how to find somebody like that?
No, but I'll tell you this: the Talmud is not asserting. Well, we'll see in a moment. Give me a second. It's a collection of braitot, which are not frequently studied. Tosfos has a very different take. So Rashi says, "Va'afilu b'meseches kala, kivan she'amar ani makir aval b'shein noisim." No, I'm sorry. Rashi says, "B'chol hashas." A person has to be proficient with the entire Talmud. Va'afilu b'meseches kala d'le'regili ba'inshi, even a very unfamiliar text or work. V'zenos and libay v'garsa, and this person is so devoted, so desirous to know the whole Torah, that he even studies Meseches Kala. And what is Meseches Kala? Braisi, and it starts with the words Kala b'lei bracha asura lebala kinida. It's a small work that has a halacha about a Kala. Starts with the word Kala. It's obscure. This is Rashi's viewpoint. Tosfos, Pirish, by contrast, the Levi Gili Ba'inshi, V'unasam b'li b'legarsa. Kiddushin, Pirish Legriosa. Person that says Amanas Shani Talmud Chacham, he doesn't need to be proficient of the vast, great works. He could even only be proficient in a very small work called Kala. Hold on one second. Tosfos has a different take based on the other Gemaras, I believe. Here he says like this. Well, actually, let's see the rest of the Gemara and then remind me, we'll try to peek back into Tosfos. So, according to Rashi, we're talking about a very great Talmud Chacham. Tosfos says maybe we're talking about, based on the next Gemara, maybe a minor Talmud Chacham. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Eizu Talmud Chacham shebnei irim mitzuven la'asos lo melachtai. Who is the Talmud Chacham who is expected for the people of the city to manage his work for him, to manage his stuff for him, to perform his labors? That Shemaniach Cheftzei v'oisek b'cheftzei Shemaim. This is a person who puts everything aside in order to engage in the study of Torah. V'hani mili. What kind of work do we mean? The mitrach b'riftei, to make sure that he has the basic subsistence so he can survive. Rashi davar she'ino yachol l'treach boy v'chayiv tuluyim boy. This is saying absolutely is essential. We're not saying that you have to, do other big, more exhaustive works. Now Rabbi Yochanan asks another interesting question, a general question. Eizehu Talmud Chacham. What is ultimately the definition of a Talmud Chacham? We're talking about who is the Talmud Chacham worthy of certain perks, but now give me an essential definition. It's a person that you ask him a halacha in any matter, in any area, and he gives the answer. Gemara says, "Lamai nafkamina." Why is it relevant to know this? Well, you need to know if he's worthy of being appointed a parnis, a leader position. And so a person has to be very proficient in Jewish law. Now, what happens if you have a Talmud Chacham who's proficient in one specialty, in one area, but not in every area. And by the way, in Shas, we find that there were certain sages of the Gemara or the Mishnah who were renowned experts in one field, but perhaps less proficient in another field. As a matter of fact, the Mishnah even describes how there was a little bit of a, I don't remember, was it an Gemara? There was a plan to try to embarrass, was it Rabbi Gamliel or was it Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, to ask him in an area where he was not proficient. So what we see is that the odds of a person knowing what we might call the entire Torah is rare. So he says, you can make a person an authority on the matter that he is an expert. But if he is the biggest expert, then he would be appointed as the chief authority on halacha.
Rabbi, we had that with the amulets.
That what?
That somebody had to be a mumcha on an amulet.
Yes, but in the context of amulets, it was about the worthiness of the amulet or the odds that the person is going to keep it with them. It wasn't necessary, or the creator has a certain credibility. But here we're talking about Torah prowess. Yeah, here we're talking about Torah. But yeah, similar idea that a person has to prove their credibility. I want to go back for a moment to Tosfos.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but anyway, before, when you were talking about clothing, and okay, you threw in a Talmid Chacham and other Jewish leaders. Okay, so, and now we're only talking about a Talmid Chacham, a Baki in Tanakh, in Talmud. So, why when we talk about clothes did you throw that in? I mean, because you could make an argument here that an important Jewish leader, and many of them are not Shomer Mitzvah, are deserving of some of the same reactions from the community.
I'll tell you why I said it, because over there we were talking about hakpada. Does a stain bother the individual or not? If the stain bothers you, it's a chatzitza. It interferes with toiveling and a mikveh. And so I wanted to be clear that although generally we're saying, oh, a person that's less educated and sophisticated could care less about a stain, and a person who is more cultured, educated, or mindful of their appearance would be bothered by it. So I wanted to clarify that in this context, although primarily we're talking about Talmid Chacham, in the laws of chatzitza, it would extend really to anybody that is mindful and values their presentation. But now, as a spin-off of that conversation, we're talking here exclusively about different tiers of a Talmid Chacham. Now, a Talmid Chacham, you can have other people that are mindful of their clothing. But here the question is, a Talmid Chacham who takes their role as a representative of Torah seriously. And so a Talmid Chacham who's mindful of their clothing, that is an indication that he sees himself and understands that he is representing Torah. And then now we're talking about other kinds of Talmidei Chachamim that are worthy of other or greater perks. And so this conversation has veered into the area that's exclusively talking about different types of Talmidei Chachamim. But in its initial introduction, the idea was more broadly applicable. So that's why I clarified that there and over here. That's not to say that there aren't important discussions that other leaders and perhaps perks or responsibilities that other leaders have. And indeed, throughout the Gemara, we talk and we'll talk about different responsibilities of a leader. Some places we've discussed and we'll discuss about a Gabbai Tzedakah and certain responsibilities he has to the community and other types of individuals of leadership. But now our Gemara is focusing on different types of Talmidei Chachamim and Talmid Chacham fitting leadership positions. So this is not the exclusion of lay leadership.
Right.
On the contrary, we talk often about a Reish Kaluta, let's say, who is entirely I guess we might call it a lay leadership, or not at the very least, not a Talmud Chacham leadership. This is a people that have certain authority and communal representation. So that's how I understand it, and that's why.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it's a very, very strange way to define a Talmud Chacham, because a Kala, whatever it is,
what is?
To say that he knows Masechet Kala could be somebody who's very interested in Yonim No,
hold on. I'm going to
Kala?
just cut you. Hold on. I'm going to just cut you off for a moment. I want to just show you the text so that we make sure we're discussing with precision. A person who knows every matter, even the obscure discussion of Kala. So it's not, he has to be proficient.
Why would they have to add that? What does it help us
Because
to add
Masechet
that?
Kala, according to Rashi, is a not commonly studied text. And so a person who really cares will even care to
I don't know. It sort of denigrates Masechet Kala, and it's still there. It's still
it
part
acknowledges a reality, I think.
It might not be difficult for everybody.
It's not about difficulty, it's about obscurity. You have the works that people commonly study, and then you have the works that are less essential, let's say, just because of the subject matter, and that's our point.
Okay, I will try to look up the subject matter. Maybe it's anybody who has to deal with a Kala. If he can deal with a
No. You're misunderstanding. No. This is not a tractate. That's the laws of a Kala. It's a text that has a specific obscure discussion about a specific blessing, or it's not a commonly, as Rashi explains, it's not. You're thinking of Masechet Kiddushin, let's say, which actually a person would be expected to know. But here we're talking about Dafka, a relatively obscure and unfamiliar work. But before we continue, I want to show you another take on Masechet Kala. So Rashi says, Afilu Masechet Kala, even an unfamiliar or obscure or not commonly studied text. But there is another take on it. Of Yitzchak Mefarish, the Hai Masechet Kala. What is Masechet Kala? Hainu Drashot Hasdurot Mihilchot Achag Kidarmina B'lo Yachpor. It's a elementary text that is about presenting the basic matters of the laws of the holidays. And indeed, in the Gemara in Baba Basra, it says, who is the Talmud Chacham? A person who's proficient in the text that he's currently working in the specific Masechta that he's working in. Afilu Masechet Kala, even if all he is proficient is in the most simple and obvious work. And so basically we have a similar phrase to convey who the greatest type of Talmud Chacham is, but we have a similar but very opposite text that conveys the most limited possible identity as a Talmud Chacham. So you have the real Talmud Chacham who knows everything, even in obscure work, but then you have a very small Talmud Chacham who's only proficient in a single, simple work. And again, in this interpretation, that's the laws, the basic laws of the holidays. And so it might be the two bookends of who is considered a Talmud Chacham, and then everyone else is everything in between. So just to confuse things before we close out this discussion.
So if one is the requirement of having an exhaustive knowledge of everything that there is to learn,
right?
The other is a Chacham from the Manishtana, as they say, focuses on one thing. Here you're saying
right.
Holidays, I'll say on the Haggadah, okay. And it's possible that the time required is the same. In other words, if somebody's interested in one topic, they can spend the 10, 20 years. And if to be knowledgeable about the exhaustive books that we have doesn't happen when you're 14 years old.
No.
Okay. So, the question is, quantity versus quality. I mean, you're not, unless you have an Eloi or some genius,
right?
You have to decide on priorities.
Right. Well, I think in general, a person who studies Torah just for the perks of the role, that's a pretty disappointing motivation to study Torah.
Right.
So the assumption is that most people are studying they're more profitable occupations than Torah study. So if a person is doing it just for the perks, you might want to get a job that gives you, insurance and paid vacation and and a retirement fund, to be a Talmid Chacham. Okay, so there is a little perk, but hopefully the person that's going to engage in that lifestyle and a life mission is going to do it because they truly value the Torah. Otherwise, there are probably better areas to embrace.
Unless you want to include your account in Olam HaEmes.
Right.
Different accounting system up there.
I hate to use the expression that comes lahavdil from another subject. I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah. So anyways, basically the bottom line, if I had to give you one line summary, there is a spectrum of Talmidei Chachamim, starting from a baseline, the smallest, most narrow kind of Talmid Chacham, a person who has an area of expertise. And then you have a true, vast Talmid Chacham with broad knowledge of Torah. That is the ideal and truest type of Talmud Torah scholar. Just to show you something interesting real fast, in the Code of Jewish Law, this hierarchy is somewhat referenced in the context of Aliyah allocation. Shabbas Ch Yom Kippurim. So there is a series of Aliyahs. Kairim Achar Levi. So the Kohen gets the Kohen. You have to be a Kohen. The Levi gets the Levi. You just have to be a Levi. I don't mean you just have to be a Levi. You have to be a Levi. And by the way, in Yontif this year, we had, I think, a lot of Leviim, K'nai Nahar. Believe it or not, as much as we had a nice group of Leviim for the first minyan, there was a never-ending line of Leviim at the second minyan. K'nai Nahar.
One Levi wanted to charge me to go up.
Yeah. Could I, Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just want to interject something, a personal question. As a Levi, I wash the Kohen's hands, who happens to be the rabbi of the shul that I sometimes go to with a mask. And I wash it the way I wash everybody's hands. My minhag, I wash the right hand 3 times and then the left hand. And I noticed that this young rabbi, who was also a Maki Cheer during the week, wasn't totally comfortable and was sort of indirectly suggesting that that his minhag, you know him in the mirror, you can see him, is not the way I was washing him. Did I read you correctly?
I don't think that was my intention. Assuming that I'm correctly identifying, I don't recall what might have been,
right.
But I don't think that was the case.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I should add, there's one halacha that I think a lot of folks don't know, which is that really the Levi also is entitled to have his hands washed. The Levi washes their own hands. Now, the problem in a case like our shul, where there's a lot of Leviim and not so many sinks, is that if all the Leviim are washing their hands, the Kohanim won't get their hands washed. So, I know.
Right.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have to think back what I might have been, but no.
Yeah.
It was not a critique of the Levi who was washing my hands, and on the contrary, I was grateful to have such an esteemed Levi wash my hands.
Right.
Also, by the way, a Talmid Chacham in my estimation. So,
I'm signing off now. Talmid Chacham from the Manishtana, exactly.
Yeah, so there's a definition. Somebody who knows how to wash the hands of the Kohanim properly.
That is not that is not the case. But I happen to know that this Levi has additional areas of expertise beyond the washing the Kohen's hands. Let's see Shulchan Aruch real fast. So on Shabbos, after the Kohen and Levi, who goes Shlishi? Talmid Chacham hamamunim ala tzibur, a kind of Talmid Chacham of the high caliber, worthy of communal appointment. Achareihem Talmid Chacham haroyim lemenoisem parnosem ala tzibur, and then after that, a even greater Talmud Chacham who is appointed as a Parnes. I'm sorry, I take that back. Then goes those that are actually appointed. Then goes those who are worthy of appointment. And here we say, they have a proficiency in all halachic matters. And then the children of Talmidei Chachamim, their parents, their ancestors, there is a hereditary line of Talmidei Chachamim, but these children are yet to achieve, as the doctor pointed out, the doctor, the Levi pointed out, it takes time. No one is born a Talmid Chacham. And then the lay leadership, and then all of the people. So there's an interesting hierarchy or chronology of who receives different kibudim. I'll just tell you this. If we're going to open the next tier of commentary, we'll see a lot of additional details, discussions.
Interesting, it doesn't mention Shishi especially.
Yeah, so I don't think now is the right time to do this exhaustively. It would be an interesting text to bookmark and study, because basically, I'll tell you this: one of the good things about Aliyahs is different kihilot, different communities have a different set of hierarchies. So if you get it right, you can give the person who wants. You could have a lot of chasha people, and you can give the person who wants shlishi, and the person who really wants shishi. The person who wants shvi or mashlim can have shvi, and someone else can have maftir. So if you play your cards right, it's possible to be mechabed many people with their optimum kibudim. So anyways, it's an interesting halacha. We can explore it more at length, but I think we should reserve that for the right time. Yes?
I played my cards wrong on the holiday. I was selling Ajay Moshe, and we started at 100, 152. We end up selling it for $200 in your shul. So the guy person goes, in Mexico, we sell this for $10,000. I said, okay, we're going to bill you for $9,800.
By the way, I learned this yontiv, an important shul management sod. Every minyan that sells aliyahs needs one plant. One plant is the difference of a $200 aliyah and $1,000 aliyah. Because if no one's bidding on aliyah, people assume it's not valuable, and so they don't want to. But if one person is really excited about it, everyone says, "Oh wow, this is." And the truth of the matter is, on Yontif, on Pesach, there's not a single aliyah that's not incredibly valuable and desirable. Who doesn't want to have an aliyah on Yontif? So it's all about marketing.
Well, what happens when the plant winds up with the final?
So the plant has to be willing to actually take.
Payday.
No. By the way, if a person bids and isn't actually interested in aliyah, they're just trying to knock someone else's aliyah up, there is a serious shaila of gnevas das. You're. It's not so simple to bid if you're not sincere about it. But if you're willing to bid, but you're. So, anyways, all interesting stuff. We could spend a few weeks just on this subject, on these halachas. But I'm not sure if that's where we're gonna. Well, let's actually hold on one more second. Let's just take a fast look over here.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Once we're on the subject, we had certain people, if they didn't get shishi, they wouldn't take the aliyah. Isn't that sort of? Doesn't that create a halachic problem? Never mind anything else. To refuse it?
Why?
Explain the halachic problem.
You can refuse an aliyah. What?
Oh, you're saying they would be called up and they wouldn't approach the bima?
No, he wouldn't take it. They go. We used to have a blettel. I'll give him, and if it wasn't shishi, he would refuse it.
Okay.
I would, you know what I would do? I would suggest the chavrusa in Hilchas Kriyas HaTorah.
No, it was an older person, and I never wanted to confront him.
Interesting. I just want to show you here in the Mishnah Berurah in the Bir Halacha. Hold on. He makes an interesting point. If I could find here. Ve'ata nisadar achiyovim shasgan mechoyev litzavos likrois and koydem lachirim. There is a hierarchy, additional hierarchy. As is elaborated in the Levush and the Magen Avram, the important, essential Ashkenazic poskim who come in on these matters. So here is the chronology as he's quoting the Magen Avram. Chasen b'yem chupasoi, a chasen on the day of his wedding. Chasen b'Shabbas koydem lachasana. The chasen on his roof, shemezamrin oisoi. Nar shenasa bar mitzvah b'yis Shabbos. Then you have a bar mitzvah yingel. Bal isha yeledes b'Shabbos sheleches lebeis hakneses. A new father. Chasen b'Shabbos shachar chasen. And then you have the chasen after the chasana. Yartzeit b'Shabbos. A yartzeit boy by Yom. Yom shemeis by Aviv by Imoy. Then Avi Yeled Zocher b'Shabbos lefnei Hamila. And then you have the son who's not actually giving a name, but his wife is a Yeledes. Yesh mekoy Moshe noigim shegam amoyel v'asande came chiyuvim. V'yesh ein noigim came rak mechab the noisei b'agbasa sefer Torah. And others won't give an aliyah, but they'll give hagba to the bali asimcha, the moyel and the sandik.
So this seems to give license for hasafos very easily. I mean, I'm a chiyuv. So I came a little bit late to shul, but you gave him out. But I have your side, or this is my bar mitzvah son. So
yeah, I mean, in the Shiloh's of Chuvas, there's a lot of discussion about nuanced circumstances.
No, but they talk about adding aliyahs.
Well, there's adding aliyahs. There's who actually is entitled. What happens if you don't have a lot of aliyahs? Is there a different entitlement if you're a member of the shul? Membership wasn't invented, in 1900 or 19. This is something that there are certain entitlements if you're a member of a kehila.
Rabbi, there's a much bigger problem during the week, and you have a coin and you want to ask him to step out. I mean, serious stuff goes on with aliyahs. It's a
yeah. And then he adds over here by the chasen b'yem chupasa. And we say a chasen on their wedding day. Obviously, he says we're talking about the chol. We're talking about in a weekday. Sheyasa chupa b'yem zeh. So who koydem l'chol achivim? Then he has an absolute entitlement to an aliyah. Afilu linar shenasa bar mitzvah b'yoyim zeh. You have two Yisraelim, a koyin. I'm sorry, not a koyin. You have two people that need an aliyah. Chosim b'yoyim chasanasai and a bar mitzvah yingel. A bar mitzvah bachar, I should say. Who goes first? Chosim b'yoyim chupasai. So imagine pushing out a bar mitzvah boy on his bar mitzvah. So you make sure up front to arrange that there should be that the bar mitzvah boy will get his aliyah. And by the way, kol shekain shekoydem the yahrzeit, and for sure a chasen has priority over a yahrzeit. Here now, nar shenasa bar mitzvah boy shavua. Now a bar mitzvah boy, im yesh loy iranit. If he is a member of the city, if he has city rights, well, then there is a certain priority of a bar mitzvah boy over anyone else. And of course, the bar mitzvah boy's father makes the bracha of Baruch Shepatrani. With the exception of a chasen who he's equal. And so if you have two people of equal value, now he says Yatil Guru. If the boy is not a member of the city, although he needs an aliyah, the bar mitzvah boy doesn't supplant other chiyuvim. Chasen not only on the day of his wedding, but the offer of Shabbos. Now, and this is interesting. You have an ofruf finish, the calling up of a chasen before his wedding. Well, sometimes this happens in particular when you have a wedding in Eretz Yisrael, let's say, on Sunday, well, the chassan needs to travel before Shabbos. And so he might get called up the Shabbos prior. It's a proper Shabbos chassan. Almon, which if a person is a widow, so the second in remarriage, you don't have all of the same festivities of the first wedding. Even if she is never married. But of course, if you can, you should give an aliyah.
You know, people come into shul that don't know, they think it's simple.
I want to tell you one more thing, by the way. From here, this text, which is, again, I think quoting the Magen Avraham, but it's in the Mishnah Brura, we see that Ashkenazim, Eli, listen carefully, Ashkenazim and Sfardim, we see a clear distinction. Eli, tell me, what is the Shabbat Chatan?
When the guy goes up to the Torah.
When does the guy go up to the Torah?
Before the wedding, and sometimes even after the wedding. It's very weird.
No, I think in Sephardic circles, Shabbat Chatan really is the Shabbat after the wedding.
Right.
After the wedding.
In Ashkenazic circles,
before.
Shabbat Chatan is an Ufruf, the Shabbos that precedes. Yes. And so I get calls sometimes. The person tells me, no, we're doing the wedding and we want to have the Aliyah. So it's not always clear, or you could usually determine their heritage, or at least some information about their heritage, based on when they want that Shabbos to be. The preceding.
Oh yeah, it's usually after. You're right. It's after Sheva Brachot and everything. You're right.
Yeah, in the week of it. Yeah. Interesting enough. Let's close that over here, even though there's a lot to read. Yard site, hu chiyuv. Interestingly enough, a yard site, he says, is a chiyuv, but he is of lower priority, and this is the same than other chiyuvim. So interesting, because in today's culture, a yard site, one might say, is of highest priority, right? But that's only if the actual day of the yard site is on Shabbos. If it's in the week, he doesn't even have the ability to push away the father of a bris. But of course, if there is no other chiyuv, or we can afford an aliyah, we'll give the Baal HaYard Site an aliyah. So basically, there are a lot of different traditions and minhagim. One more line. Let's take a look. What happens if a person purchases an aliyah? And the Gabbai realizes there's somebody in shul that is entitled. He can void the sale. It was a mistaken sale. If there are two chiyuvim, they should make a girl.
Rabbi, if you didn't feel pressure before, after this, you're going to feel more pressure.
Anyways, isn't that fun?
So let me ask you a question. In halacha, how do you make your girl? Do you flip a coin? I mean, is there a way halachically?
In our shul, we've never had to make a girl. I'll tell you that.
But is there halacha as far as how to do that?
I would have to do a little research, but I'll tell you this: Chabadniks, and I'm sure in other kihilot as well, one of the greatest honors that a person could have, and we're talking about in times past, would be to receive an aliyah before a wedding or a bar mitzvah at the minyan of the Rebbe. And if a person received an aliyah at the Rebbe's minyan, they would actually have the opportunity to possibly stand next to the Rebbe for their aliyah. And this was something very important and very special. And chasanim, there would be multiple chasanim. They would have a girl. I don't know the nuance. I don't know the exact specifics of how the girl went, but they would have a girl. And the same thing for bar mitzvah. Sometimes they would have to do a girl, and there'd be later minyanim, but not the Rebbe's minyan. And similarly, I would just say about our shul. Today we're Baruch Hashem experiencing a lot of growth, but we don't usually have. I don't think we've ever had more than one bar mitzvah in a single Shabbos, or more than one chassan in a single Shabbos. But mitzvah Hashem with growth, we might have it, and we may have it. We may, with Hashem's help, come to a point where maybe there will be multiple chasanim, and then we'll have to do a girl. Most likely, that girl should transpire before Shabbos. And if you didn't tell anybody until Shabbos that you're getting married, or that you have a bar mitzvah, I think you forfeited. You forfeited your rights to that aliyah. If it's very important, you can take care of it beforehand. Yes.
I just remember in the big synagogue in Moscow on Shabbat, they read in the four corners from 4 Sefer Torahs and gave everybody an aliyah.
When?
10 years ago on a regular Shabbos in Moscow, the big shul.
Interesting.
They had like a blaffle that pulled out between the seats in the corners to make a bima, sort of.
Interesting. Now, I know I keep on telling you that we're going to go back into the Gemara, but this is the Mishnah Berurah. I got to show you one more very important caveat here. B'chol Zemairi, we have a whole series, a hierarchy of who receives an aliyah. B'chol Zemairi b'mkayim shein moichem ha-mitzvahs. This is all in a place where there isn't a sale of the different kibudim and the mitzvahs. And therefore you have a gabbai who has to figure out the hierarchy of aliyahs based on the halachic protocols. In a situation, in a minyan where the mitzvahs, the aliyahs are sold, and the proceeds go to tzedakah, if you purchase the aliyah, you can honor whoever you like. Obviously, you need to be mindful to not have machlokes. Now, if someone asked the question, what happened to Shishi or Shvi? I thought it's Shlishi. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Nowadays, Mashlim might be the greatest honor. Where's Eli? Eli, in your synagogue, what's the most expensive aliyah? Do you ever sell aliyot?
Yes, we do.
What?
Maftir, Musaf, Maftir.
What about Mashlim?
Maftir. Mashlim is also, I think Musaf, from the last one is more expensive.
The last one
both
is?
Have Kaddish, so they're good. They both have Kaddish, so they're both well,
okay.
Well there.
So anyways, here, the Mishnah Berurah quotes that today, the Achron, the final aliyah might be, and here he writes here he quotes, it says, "V'makom shenagu shaparnesu Allah eina rasha limchol la'achar sheyakaribim kamon." When a place where the parnes, the president or the leader is always called up, he is not allowed to waive his rights. Then he says like this: there are places that prioritize only age over Torah. And he's critical of that.
In the shul that they sell the aliyahs, do they also shnutter?
Could they? Should they? What are you asking?
I just what is usually done? I guess it depends on the individual.
It depends. In the Sephardic minyan, I got complaints from the people that pray in the Brooklyn Syrian shuls that over there they sell aliyot and they shnutter, but they don't say shnutter in how do you call it? In
Latino.
No. We're talking here about the good Syrian. What do you call? What's the big shul? Sharei Tzion.
Sharei Tzion.
They don't call it shnutter. But I believe you get a Misha Beirach.
Rav Katzin is the Rav there.
But the Misha Beirach apparently is in addition to the sale price, whereas the Moroccan crowd that was running that read the Torah, they don't believe in an additional amount on top of the sale price. Which, for the record, although I hate to say it, I believe in our shul. Again, we don't usually sell besides for Yontif, but I don't believe usually there's an expectation for a person to add on top of the bid for the aliyah. But I'm open to changing that. All right, we have 3 minutes left. So real fast, we're gonna have another. Remember, we said that there's a clothing called bano. We said the word banoim, and we said banoim means a builder's clothing. And then we said who are banoim? Banoim are talmidei chachamim, and banoim are more concerned about staining of garments. Reish Lakish gives a third or second interpretation of what a banoim are. Elu kelim ha'ol yorim. These are the clothing of the ol yorim. Rashi, Rabbi Steinsaltz and Rashi, and the Gemara will clarify. These are the clothing that are worn in the bathhouse. Rabbi Steinsaltz says bath attendants. Habayim Medinas Hayam, which are imported from overseas. Limemra, this seems to infer the chivare ninhu, that these garments are white. But we have a problem with asserting that these banoim garments are white. Why? An interesting citation here. Rabbi Yanai, before he passed, told his children, Bonai, my children, please don't bury me in white or dark clothing. Why not? Levonim, if you'll put me in white clothing, there might be a faux pas. Is that what we say? It might come out to be socially awkward. Shemalayeska, maybe he will not be zoche to Gan Eden. And so he's going to be sitting in Gehenim, way overdressed. He's wearing celebratory clothing, and everyone is mournful there. Rashi, Shemalayeska. I'll be sitting among those that were judged for Gehenim, and it's pretty bleak. But also, Shecharim, if you put me on dark clothing, Shema Eske, maybe I will be Zoche, Badin. And I'll be underdressed, or I'll be inappropriately dressed. Ella, you know how he wanted to be buried? He wants to be buried in this kind of imported garments. Alma Sumkininu. From here we infer that these garments are of a reddish color, not white, not black. But from the context of our discussion here, they would have to be white. So the Gemara says, there's a difference between undergarments. Undergarments can be colored. Overgarments could be white. What we are talking about here in our Gemara was white garments that were concerned about a stain. Here he's talking about undergarments that it was a neutral or middle color. This, my dear friends, concludes today's Gemara. Tomorrow, Bli Neder. I know we spent a little extra time on the Aliyah discussion, but I think it's interesting. Well, we can just recap this Gemara and see if there's any additional ideas that come to mind. Like, for example, since when do we imagine that people in heaven are wearing clothing of colors at all? So we can try to figure that out tomorrow, and then we're going to jump into the final stretch before the close of Perek 15, Chamisha Asar Masech Shabbos. Wish everyone a wonderful day.
Okay, let me get to the airport.
Oh, we're going to see you. We're going to see you here soon.
Mir Hashem.
All right, safe travels. Have a blessed and wonderful day.